It would be easy to walk past this location completely unaware of the bloodthirsty events that have happened here over the years. From neolithic henge to Roman amphitheatre to place of mass executions, welcome to Maumbury Rings.
In 2500 BC, Neolithic people created this henge with a large circular bank and inner ditch. Its exact use remains a mystery, but excavations uncovered deer skulls, fragments of bones, and carved chalk objects, which may suggest some kind of ceremonial use.
That is quite a sizable bank, isn't it? Look at that. During the 1st century AD, the Romans, who created the town of Dorset, which is now known as Dorchester, which is where Maumbury Rings is, adopted this site and they transformed it into a Roman amphitheatre.
The Romans dug deeper into the centre of the henge to create their arena. The soil removed was used to build up the surrounding banks, and it is believed that seats were carved into the bank, making this an extraordinarily sized amphitheatre.
Gladiatorial combat would have played out here to huge crowds of delighted onlookers. Fast forward to 1642, and Dorchester had sided with the parliamentarian cause during the English Civil War, and the rings were basically fortified by the garrison, and they acted as a defence system for the south side of Dorchester because they believed that the Royalist Forces would soon be upon the town. And I believe it's this ever-changing use of Maumbury Rings which has cemented its longevity within the history of the town of Dorchester.
In 1703, Maumbury Rings was transformed once again, but this time into something very macabre indeed. Public executions in Dorchester were moved from the former site at Gallows Hill to here at Maumbury Rings. The site of the former Roman amphitheatre was once again going to host great crowds, all of whom had come to witness death. It's believed the exact place of the gallows may have been just outside of the rings next to the main road, so that the gruesome sight could serve as a warning to travellers passing through. Executions were common in Dorchester and happened in great numbers, most of which had been ordered by the infamous hanging judge, Judge George Jeffreys. Jeffreys was well known for holding his bloody assizes trial here in Dorchester during the Monmouth Rebellion, where he tried over 300 prisoners, sending 175 to be transported and 74 to the gallows.
Mary Channing, the last woman to be burnt at the stake in Dorset, met her grisly end here in 1706 at the age of just 19. Let me tell you her story.
Mary was born in May 1687 to Richard and Elizabeth Brooks. Her family were devout Anabaptists, which means the children are not baptised at birth. They were a well-respected family within their community. Mary received a good education and was taught to read and write. It seemed her parents had high hopes for her future. However, during her teenage years, Mary chose a different path for herself and was known around the town for what was described in those times as having a tendency to sluttishness.
Concerned for the implications of her behaviour, Mary's parents decided to try and guide her towards marriage in the hope that a husband would be able to control her provocative ways.
Mary's father offered a considerable fortune as a dowry payment for any would-be suitor. This is where Thomas Channing came forward, not knowing his life was about to change forever. Thomas Channing came from Maiden Newton, just 8 miles northwest of Dorchester. His family owned Cruxton Manor farmhouse and were clearly well off and again well respected in their community. Thomas was set to move to Dorchester to run a shop that his father had set up, and the marriage to Mary seemed like a perfect plan for both families. However, from day one, Mary displayed a strong dislike for Thomas. Only under the persuasion of her parents would she tolerate him. After much disagreement and further acts of poor behaviour in the town, Mary was banished to her chamber and denied all her freedoms until she relented to the marriage. Eventually, Mary agreed. On the 15th of January 1704, Mary and Thomas were married.
Marriage, however, did not change Mary, and she continued to hold company with former male companions, one of which her neighbour she'd become really fond of. Tensions between Mary and Thomas were rising, and it said that Mary could be quite unkind to Thomas in public, and she seemed to relish in humiliating him. Mary clearly disliked Thomas in more ways than her parents could have ever preempted.
On the 16th of April 1705, Mary visited an apothecary and purchased some poison. She returned home and prepared a dish of rice milk heavily laced with the poison, which she then presented to her husband. Thomas ingested a small amount before declaring that it tasted foul and he would eat no more. Mary poured the rest of the concoction down the sink and washed the dish. Thomas was outside of the house when he started to feel unwell. He threw up on his doorstep, and it said one of the neighbours' dogs ate the vomit and also became very ill. With 2 cases of sickness, suspicion was aroused.
So a doctor was called to Thomas, who confirmed that he had been poisoned with mercury. The doctor prescribed a remedy to try and flush out the contents of Thomas's stomach and hoped that he would improve in due course, but sadly Thomas's condition grew worse and he set about writing his last will and testament. In it he left Mary just 1 shilling and wrote, "Only 1 shilling I give my wife, having every good reason to give her no more."
Thomas remained in considerable pain until he finally succumbed to the poison. His father was highly suspicious of Mary and ordered her to leave the house she shared with Thomas, while he organised a post-mortem to be carried out to identify the exact cause of his son's untimely death.
Mary went into hiding, but Richard Channing wasted no time in her pursuit and offered a handsome reward for her capture. Mary had got as far as Somerset until those that had helped her had a change of heart, and I guess that they were tempted by the reward that Richard was offering, so they decided to turn her in.
On Saturday, the 28th of July 1705, Mary appeared on trial before Justice Price. A large number of witnesses for the prosecution appeared before the judge, from the lady who ran the apothecary to former lovers who discredited her character to the family maid who saw Mary making the rice milk on that fateful day. Mary conducted her own defence and maintained her innocence throughout.
It took the jury just half an hour to make their decision and their verdict guilty. Mary was sentenced to death, but shockingly, Mary declared that she was with child. The sentence was agreed to be postponed until after the birth of her baby, and Mary remained hopeful that this would allow her to appeal for a pardon.
Mary's family did all that they could to support Mary to obtain that pardon, but to no avail. Mary delivered her son on December the 19th, 1705. Although against her family's beliefs, Mary had her son baptised with haste. Her father wrote to Queen Anne for a pardon in a last bid to save his daughter. After giving birth, Mary grew weak with a fever but persevered in nursing her new baby boy. On Friday, the 8th of March, Mary was once again brought before the court and asked if she knew of any reason as to why the sentence should not be carried out. Mary did not have an answer, maintaining her innocence. With her inevitable death looming, Mary asked to be baptised, and this was granted.
On the 21st of March 1706, Mary was moved by cart from the prison in the town to the gallows here at Maumbury Rings. The clergymen continued to pray for Mary and begged her to confess, but Mary was absolute and she continued to profess her innocence to the very end.
Mary was tied by her neck to the stake, which strangled her until she passed out before the fires were lit at her feet, which soon engulfed her entire body. Sadly, no one seems to know what became of Mary's son.
It's said that 2 other criminals were executed here on the same day as Mary. They faced their executions in the morning, and it's said that the executioner enjoyed a lavish lunch before then moving on to execute Mary Channing, and the fires were lit at 5 p.m. in the evening, so she would have had a whole day ahead thinking, oh my gosh, you know, that her end was imminent. All the thoughts that you can't even imagine that go with that. It's just wow. And you know, Mary, she professed her innocence all the way. I mean, there are theories that people just disliked her because of the way she behaved within the community. Maybe they just thought, oh, at last, let's get rid of this woman, she's trouble. It's interesting. I do wonder, you know, did she actually kill him?
Famous Dorset writer and poet Thomas Hardy always believed that Mary was innocent and used her story as inspiration for his poem, The Mock Wife. Hardy had an interest in executions, particularly of females, and he watched the famous hanging of Martha Brown here in Dorchester when he was just 16 years old. This led to the inspiration behind the character Fanny Charles from his well-known book Tess of the d'Urbervilles. Dorchester and Maumbury Rings were also the inspiration behind Hardy's classic The Mayor of Casterbridge.
You can sure imagine the bloodthirsty crowds for when it was a Roman Amphitheatre and from when it was site of executions, jam-packed of people. Now, you'd think there would be an abundance of ghost stories associated with Maumbury Rings because of all of its dark history, but actually all I could find was one that occurs actually at all Roman sites, is that there is a ghost of a Roman centurion who's been seen moving around the rings. Local folklore says that if you fall asleep on the rings, you'll dream about the site's days as a Roman amphitheatre, and you'll have some quite intense dreams, as if you're there yourself in that time. What an incredible site. What dark history. There's absolutely so much going on here over the centuries. Well, thank you for joining me here at Maumbury Rings. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about its dark history. If you're not subscribed to my channel, please do consider doing so, and I look forward to seeing you all again, as always, on the next Wyrd Walk.